To kick us off again for the second session, I'm pleased to introduce Maleyne Syracuse, our very own. She will shortly receive her master's degree here in the History of Decorative Arts and Design program at Parsons and the Cooper Hewitt. As part of her program of study, she's actually worked as a curatorial intern in the textiles department. Hey, textiles. And she writes about textiles for the Cooper Hewitt's Object of the Day blog, and she is also the treasurer of the Textile Society of America. Her paper this afternoon, entitled Color as Form in Grethe Sørensen's Digitally Woven Art, is based on research completed for her master's thesis, The Aesthetics of Digital Weaving, Tactile Sensibility in the Art of Leah Cook and Grethe Sørensen. So, Maleyne Syracuse.
Thank you, Ethan. Okay. Woven art operates within a specific formal domain, one that has remained essentially unchanged for thousands of years. It is the forming of pliable planes of interlaced threads. The form of that interlacing, the weave structure, and the technologies that control it to a large degree influence or determine how color may be used in the textile's visual program. Until the late 20th century, structural innovations in the manner of thread interlacing were limited by available loom technology. The digital jacquard hand loom has opened the door to a new physical and visual vocabulary for woven textile art in the 21st century. Because of the unique correlation between the digital matrix and the woven grid, digital design software has become a potent companion to the digital loom for the development of new forms of expression, including inventive new ways to use color in the woven form. The digital weavings of Danish weaver Grethe Sørensen are vibrant examples of the aesthetic consequences of structural innovations available with new design and weaving technology. Sorensen uses her weaving skill and expertise to leverage the power of Photoshop and the digital jacquard loom to create inventive works such as Rush Hour to Shanghai, now in the collection of the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum. Rush Hour to Shanghai gives form to an ephemeral world of colored light in ways that would have been impossible to produce in woven cloth with earlier technology. Form and color go hand in hand in weaving. Woven form or weave structure is the interlacing of warp and weft. The warp is a plane of threads that run vertically, laid out parallel to one another in a fixed order. With each row of weaving, certain warps are raised to allow the weft, the horizontal thread, to pass under the raised warps and over the lowered ones. The specific warps that are raised in each successive row of weaving determine the form of the interlacing and how color is used and seen in woven cloth. The ability to vary the raised warp threads in each successive row of weaving allows the greatest possible freedom of design. Joseph Marie Jacquard's punch card loom, introduced in 1804, provided an efficient and systematic way to do this, spurring a revolution in textile manufacturing. However, by the late 20th century, the mechanical jacquard loom was as outdated as its punch cards. In the late 1970s, the first digital jacquard looms were introduced. These used computer software rather than punch cards to control the raising of individual warp threads, dramatically increasing both the possibilities for new weave structures and the speed with which these more complex forms could be woven. The early digital jacquard looms were built exclusively for industry. It was not until 1995 that the first digital hand loom, designed specifically for use by individual artist weavers, was produced. This new loom, the thread controller loom, is about the same size as a traditional hand loom. It is attached to a laptop computer, which you can see on the top, that operates the software that controls the manipulation of warp threads. More importantly, weavers can input their weave file, the design-specific instructions that control the loom, in the form of a simple bitmap in TIFF or tagged image file format. The bitmap is a graphic composed of a grid of pixels in different colors. Each column corresponds to a warp thread, and each row corresponds to insertion of weft. The loom reads bitmaps in black and white. A black square in a given row calls for the warp thread corresponding to the square's column to be raised for that insertion of weft. A white square in a row indicates that the corresponding warp remains lowered. TIFF bitmaps are widely supported by graphic design and image manipulation applications. The power of digital software, digital design software, is as important as the loom itself in driving the creation of inventive new woven forms. In particular, Photoshop, while it is not weave design software, has become a vital component of artistic innovation in digital weaving, including, as we will see, in the work of Grethe Sørensen. Photoshop has become ubiquitous in the field because it is widely available, very flexible, and can readily be used to convert photographic and other images or designs to weave structures. It is important to emphasize, however, that creating a digital weaving is not quite as simple as feeding a randomly generated bitmap into the Loom software. The thread controller Loom reads bitmaps in only two colors, black for raised warps and white for lowered warps. A red or blue area in the bitmap does not, for example, automatically create interlacings that will appear red or blue in the weaving. The weaver must establish all color effects by determining the configuration of colored threads in the warp, the sequence of colored weft threads in successive rows of weaving, and the form of interlacing itself. Neither Photoshop nor the digital loom has the ability to independently determine these essential elements of woven construction. Without the appropriate warp and weft configurations on the loom, the weave file will not achieve the desired effect. Simply put, innovative use of the digital loom requires expertise in weaving. Grethe Sørensen is a skilled and disciplined weaver who, until her work with digital technologies in the mid-2000s, was little known outside her native Denmark. Before she discovered the digital loom, she had worked for almost 30 years in the field of weaving, as a college professor, as a commercial textile designer, and as an artist. Her pre-digital hand-woven art highlights the controlled and constructive qualities of her textiles, which combine hand-dyed threads in carefully graduated colors and technically sophisticated weave structures. Sørensen's weaving expertise, exemplified by the precision and discipline in these early works, would serve her well in her exploration of new digital weaving technologies. Sørensen was an early adopter of the digital loom for artistic work. She was presented with the opportunity to work with the thread controller loom when the College of Art and Design in Kolding, Denmark, where she lives, acquired one in 2000. Her innate curiosity and the challenge of developing innovative expressions in the woven form made Sørensen receptive to the possibilities offered by the new technology. The loom at the college was available for use by weavers unaffiliated with the school for 4 weeks twice a year. Sørensen took advantage of this to thoroughly familiarize herself with the technology. The loom itself was not the issue. It was the digital design software. Photoshop was both her challenge and her inspiration. Sørensen admitted that when she started working with the new loom, she was not particularly adept with digital technologies. She used her computer almost exclusively for word processing, and all of her weaving designs were created by hand on paper. It was important to her to become proficient in Photoshop because she did not want to simply transfer her early work to a new means of production on the digital loom. Sørensen was compelled to create something totally different from what she had done before, with designs as well as woven constructions based on digital technology. In order to be free to avail herself of all the possibilities and explore into the new landscapes which digital tools give access to, she simply mastered Photoshop. Sørensen's first use of color in her exploration of the artistic possibilities of digital weaving was an effort to weave a simple color wheel. In her initial attempts, she used a technique known as posterizing, which is commonly used by weavers for translating digital images into designs for woven cloth. Posterizing relies on the fact that different weave structures produce the visual effect of different colors. To create the weave file, Photoshop is used to convert continuous gradations of color in the design, in this case the color wheel, to distinct regions of a limited number of defined index colors, with abrupt changes from one color to another, as was originally done with photographic processes to create posters. Once the image has been reduced to index colors, the weaver can then use a device known as a weave blanket, seen here, to identify the weave structure to be assigned to each indexed area to produce the desired color. A weave blanket is woven with the warp and weft sequencing intended to be used in the finished work. It is divided into a grid with each individual color block woven using a different form of interlacing to produce the different colors. The weave structures are numbered and stored in Photoshop for ease of reference. The process is a bit like color by number, and the result is a mosaic-like arrangement of discrete areas of color. While weavings with complex and intricate visual programs are produced using the posterizing technique, some with custom color palettes of up to 500 different weave structures, Sørensen found the results of the posterizing approach for her color wheel awkward. It did not achieve the elegant and smooth transitions from color to color that she was looking for. But it was not just a question of color. The texture of the cloth was just as important. The visual properties of the juxtaposition of different weave structures, the variety of tactile values, did not, to her mind, produce a beautiful surface effect. In fact, they further detracted from the soft color gradations that she was trying to achieve. And dividing the wheel into thinner and thinner slivers of distinct colors, each with their own corresponding weave structure, was not the solution. Sørensen knew there had to be another way to achieve her objective. Sørensen's creative intuition and her understanding of weave structure led her to devise a different way to construct her color wheel. She worked back and forth between Photoshop and the thread controller Loom she ultimately purchased for her own studio in 2004 to develop ideas and test them in actual thread and woven form. Her experimentation ultimately led her to the structure she calls random weave. In random weave, rather than using weave structure or form to determine color, she uses the color of the image to establish the weave structure. Using Photoshop, the pixels that make up the image are reduced to a designated series of primary and secondary colors that correspond to the colored threads to be used in the weaving. The weave file is then based on the arrangement of colored pixels, and the threads are interlaced such that each colored pixel is represented in the woven cloth by a visible thread of the same color. I could transform the beauty of my color spectrum on the screen directly into a weave construction, Sørensen explained. Operating on the same premise as 8-color printing or the use of colored pixels on a computer screen, the visual mixture of the colored threads produces a full spectrum of colors that transition smoothly from one to the next. In her finished color spectrum, Sørensen's random weave, which I will examine in greater detail in the context of Rush Hour 2 Shanghai in a moment, achieved the elegant convergence of color and form she sought, the fluid succession of color with a consistent tactile character. Color spectrum led to projects in which Sørensen collaborated with her husband, Bo Hovgaard, a videographer, on video animations. These included Out of Focus and Millions of Colors, both of which were based on frame grabs from animations of slowly streaming, oversized colored pixels. These also helped to evolve her random weave structure. After her weavings derived from video animations, Sørensen sought inspiration in video imagery taken from the real world. Rush Hour 2 Shanghai was part of the Traces of Light series, 18 large-scale weavings developed by Sørensen from videos shot by her husband at night in cities around the world. Hovgaard's videos captured the colored light coming from the headlights of moving cars, traffic lights, and illuminated advertising signs in nocturnal urban environments. In the darkness, physical things disappear and man-made lights trace their own colors, patterns, and forms in the night, Sørensen explained. Photorealism was not the objective. Rather, the video camera was intentionally unfocused, capturing a sensory or impressionistic image, which would then be transposed into woven form. The Traces of Light weavings were displayed in a dramatic installation at the prestigious Round Tower exhibition space in Copenhagen in 2012. The large-scale textiles were featured alongside similarly sized projections of Hovgaard's nocturnal video footage. This successful exhibition drew international attention to Sørensen's digital work and her random weave technique. Ethereal motifs of light might seem unlikely subjects for textural cloth. Light itself is nothing but electromagnetic radiation visible to the human eye. It has no haptic materiality. On the other hand, Sorensen is using the video frame grab to gather fine details about colors, patterns, and forms that can be captured and used in her work. She uses Photoshop to deconstruct those details and then the digital loom to reconstruct them in cloth. Translated by her artistic process, the random yet structured beauty of the colored particles of light is well suited to the woven form. The origin of Rush Hour 2 Shanghai was a frame grab from one of Hovgaard's videos shot in Shanghai, China, which Sorensen chose for its balanced composition. But the frame grab was only the beginning. The next steps involved establishing the physical elements of the woven form. As discussed earlier, the nature of the thread to be woven, as well as the colors and layout of the warp and the colors and sequencing of the weft, must be established. The computer does not do this. Fixing these parameters is a matter of artistic judgment with direct consequences for the character the textile produced. For this part of her process, Sorensen had to begin at the loom that would actually be used to weave her finished work. Because of its size, Sorensen wove Rush Hour 2 Shanghai, as well as the other finished pieces from the Traces of Light series, on an industrial jacquard loom at the Digital Lab in the Textile Museum in Tilburg, the Netherlands. Sorensen's thread controller loom is not large enough to weave the final full-size textile, although weaving samples in her studio remained an integral part of her design process. The Tilburg loom presented one immediate constraint. It is warped with standard smooth cotton threads alternating in color between black and white. Warping a digital loom, particularly an industrial loom, is a time-consuming and exacting process. All of the weavers who use the looms at the Textile Museum must use the same black and white warp. Thus, the only means for Sorensen to introduce colors into her work is in the weft. She devised a system of 8 colors of weft threads in a fixed sequence: black, red, green, blue, white, cyan, magenta, and yellow. These colors are those from the RGB CMY color model. This model is commonly used in a variety of applications because it bears the closest resemblance to how we perceive color. Red, green, and blue are used in additive combinations, which are those that use projected light, as is done in cathode ray tube displays. In additive combinations, the colored light is added to a black field, the absence of color, and the eye perceives combinations of red, green, and blue. Cyan, magenta, and yellow are used for subtractive combinations, which are those that use reflected light, as is done with printing. In subtractive combinations, one begins with a white field that reflects the full spectrum of colors, and pigments are added that absorb certain wavelengths. For example, cyan absorbs red so that only blue, green, or cyan is visible, and so on. In Rush Hour 2 Shanghai, as in all the Traces of Light weavings, red, green, or blue weft would always be interlaced with black warp threads in additive combinations. Similarly, cyan, magenta, or yellow weft would always be interlaced with white warp threads in subtractive combinations. The essential element in Sorensen's random weave is that she planned to consistently use the full rotation of 8 colored wefts in the weaving, and that each weft would be continuous. That is to say, each weft thread would run the full width of the textile from selvage to selvage. This means that each line of pixels in the image would be woven by a full sequence of 8 continuous wefts. In almost all rows, different colors would be needed at different points to realize the design. Sorensen devised her warp and weft interlacing such that a colored weft would appear on the surface only in that segment of the row where it is called for. For the remainder of its pass, it would be woven underneath the face of the textile. Put another way, Rush Hour 2 Shanghai would have 100 threads per centimeter of weft, approximately 35,000 in total, but only approximately 12.5 threads per centimeter would actually appear on the face. Sorensen chose smooth cotton weft threads that would be fine enough to be packed into layers as they were beat into the cloth. When it is not needed on the face, each weft would reside in the middle or reverse of the textile, creating a truly three-dimensional woven form. Having established these physical parameters of warp and weft, Sorensen uses Photoshop to manipulate the colored bitmap of the image into a weave file. Contrast adjustments are a crucial first step. Weaving dampens the colors because the intersections of thread, even in the large-scale textile, cannot be as fine as the individual pixels of the original image. On the other hand, strengthening the colors must be done carefully to preserve the color contrast that create the sense of depth in the image. The circles of light in Hovgaard's original video occupy multiple planes in space, and this effect must be artfully maintained. Sørensen then resizes the bitmap to account for the size and number of warp and weft threads in the weaving, the image on top. This has the effect of elongating the image because, as noted earlier, there are 8 weft threads for every row of pixels. Next, she reduces the colors in the bitmap at the level of the pixel to the 8 index colors of weft thread. Then, because each weft insertion is a thread of a single color, she must expand each row of polychrome pixels into 8 separate rows, 1 for each colored weft insertion, in the proper sequence. She renders the final weave file, however, only in black and white because, as previously discussed, the digital loom does not read color, only black for warp up or white for warp down. The color effect is realized because the physical wefts are inserted in the weaving in the 8-color sequence that precisely matches the separated colors of the 8 rows of pixels seen here on your right. Sørensen's random weave is unlike any traditional weave construction. Her structure, however, is not random in the sense of arbitrary or accidental. It is quite deliberately planned. Random refers instead to the fact that Sørensen is not imposing a pre-existing or predetermined weave structure on the cloth, as is done with posterizing. The interlaced construction of threads in each weaving is a function of the unique arrangement of colored pixels in the underlying image. Color is her form. Thus, the precise order of the interlacings in Rush Hour 2 Shanghai differs from that of the other tapestries in the Traces of Light series. In spite of their random or unique construction, these weaves do have, as Sørensen points out, their own character. In Rush Hour 2 Shanghai, the qualities of the inner structure manifest themselves in the highly textural surface of the cloth with a clarity and consistency of expression. It is a coherent weave structure with deliberate tactile effects that are as important to Sørensen as the creation of color effects. The soft bodies of colored light are not only realized in the weave structure, but also enhanced by it. The development of the weave file that produced this distinctive transposition of color into form was a rigorous and disciplined process involving as much art as science. The steps I described are only the highlights. Subtle refinements to the weave structure evolved over the course of months as Sørensen worked on the weave file in Photoshop and wove samples on the thread controller loom in her studio. She had to see and feel the actual cloth before she was satisfied with its form. The manual work with thread and construction is essential in order to be able to play with the tactile values embedded in the textile, Sørensen explained. Computer programs will never have the sensuous knowledge of your hands. Rush Hour 2 Shanghai's sophisticated weave structure is integral to its attraction. Images of floating circles of light from the headlights of moving cars at night are ubiquitous in contemporary television and motion pictures. The visual complexity of this three-dimensional textiles engages the viewer with this otherwise pedestrian image. The soft circles of light are not merely projected on the surface. They are embedded in an active woven construction. The sensuous tactile surface of Rush Hour 2 Shanghai rescripts our encounter with this arguably ordinary phenomenon. The colored lights haptically materialize in motion in the intriguing performance of a play of surfaces. Digital weaving technology has broken down barriers between virtual and physical media. The face of the weaving is translucent, hinting at the layers of interlacing colored threads below the surface. The layers have reflective and refractive qualities that generate the depth and luminosity of light and the sense of motion. It is a vibrant and animated surface. The circles of light are realized in cloth but are not fixed by it. They approach, recede, and shift in the three-dimensional space of the textile. The visual articulation of weave structure creates a remarkable transposition of ethereal colored light into a material form. White light is made up of all the colors in the visible spectrum. In Rush Hour 2 Shanghai, the white circles are similarly made up of many colored particles. Black, on the other hand, is theoretically the absence of visible light. But in the illuminated city at night, light is never totally absent. and the black areas of the work reveal the vestiges of colored light in the darkness. The digital jacquard loom and its ability to read information from digital design programs as weave structure transformed Sorensen's work. I feel I have got a gift, she said recently. It's like starting over after 25 years, a new opening to a new world. Photoshop has become as integral to Sorensen's artistic practice as the digital loom itself. She needs both to weave her elusive colored light. Yet the real keys to Sorensen's innovation are her weaving skill and expertise, and her ability to effectively integrate powerful digital tools into her existing body of craft knowledge. Digital design software and the digital loom present a seemingly endless array of creative possibilities. Anything that can be scanned into Photoshop can be manipulated into a weave file. But we must ask ourselves, to what end? The artist must have a clear conceptual and aesthetic objective grounded in her understanding of the formal possibilities and constraints of the medium. Grethe Sørensen approached her work on the digital loom with the requisite clarity. Her objective in Rush Hour 2 Shanghai was to give material form to elusive colored light and woven cloth. With her virtuosity as a weaver, Sørensen uses digital tools to engage directly with the textile's formal materiality. She uses color to determine the structural elements of the woven form in an inventive way, uniquely suited to her visual program, and thus gives new life to color in weaving. Thank you.